welcome to Hidden History and Odyssey Through Time. I'm your host, John Rodriguez, and welcome to the best history podcast in New York State. Just a quick hidden side note. Today is my grandmother's 100th birthday. Although she passed away in 2017, long before this podcast was even a thought, I know she would have loved the work we are doing here at Hidden History. So happy birthday, Grandma. This is episode 34 of the podcast, and the title of this episode is Always Faithful, The Fascinating Life of U.S. Marine Corps Sergeant Major John H. Quick. On November 10, 1775, the Second Continental Congress in Philadelphia passed a resolution stating that 2 battalions of Marines be raised for service as landing forces with the fleet. This resolution established the Continental Marines and marked the birth date of the United States Marine Corps. Serving on land and at sea, these first Marines distinguished themselves in a number of important operations, including their first amphibious raid into the Bahamas in March 1776, under the command of Captain, later Major, Samuel Nicholas. The first commissioned officer in the Continental Marines, Nicholas remained the senior Marine officer throughout the American Revolution and is considered to be the first Marine commandant. Following the Revolutionary War and the formal reestablishment of the Marine Corps on July 11, 1798, Marines have served in nearly every conflict in United States history. In 1805, during the Battle of Derna, Marines rescued the kidnapped crew of the USS Philadelphia on the shores of Tripoli, receiving the nickname Leathernecks due to the high collars they wore as protection against the sabers of pirates. The decades following the War of 1812 saw U.S. Marines protecting American interests around the world. Following the Spanish-American War of 1898, in which Marines performed with valor in Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines, the Marine Corps entered an era of expansion and professional development. In 1918, during the First World War, Marine forces launched a last-ditch close combat assault against German soldiers and completely destroyed the defensive counterattack. Surviving German soldiers nicknamed their adversaries Devil Dogs due to their relentless fighting spirit. By the end of World War II in 1945, the Marine Corps had grown to include 6 divisions, 5 air wings, and supporting troops. Its strength in World War II peaked at 485,113, with nearly 87,000 killed and wounded during the conflict. By the end of the Second World War, 82 Marines had earned the Medal of Honor. Today's Marine Corps stands ready to continue in the proud tradition of those who so valiantly fought and died during World War I, World War II, the Korean and Vietnam Wars, combining a long and proud heritage of faithful service to the nation with the resolve to face tomorrow's challenges. The Marine Corps will continue to be the best of the best. One U.S. Marine who faithfully served his nation for over 30 years was a man named John Henry Quick, who was awarded the Medal of Honor during the Spanish-American War, rose to the rank of Sergeant Major, and saw action in places like Cuba, the Philippines, Mexico, and France. Throughout his 30 years of service, John H. Quick exemplified the core values that form the bedrock of being a U.S. Marine. John Henry Quick's story, hidden history that has remained long forgotten, is the story of an American hero ingrained with the core values of honor, courage, and commitment, and an American society today in need of some inspiration from the past. John Henry Quick was born on June 20th, 1870 in Charlestown, West Virginia, to Landon and Georgiana Quick. Details of John's early life are unknown, but we do know that less than 2 months after his 22nd birthday, on August 10, 1892, John enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He was sent to training camp in New Jersey on September 17, 1892, and by October 12, 1895, John had risen to the rank of corporal. On May 1, 1896, he was promoted again to sergeant, and when his enlistment ended on August 9, 1897, John was honorably discharged with the character rank of excellent, and he was awarded the Good Conduct Medal. John re-enlisted in the Marines on August 10, 1897, and was reappointed as a sergeant. John could not have possibly known that his re-enlistment came at the perfect time, for the United States would soon be involved in its first overseas conflict, with major military campaigns in both Cuba and the Philippine Islands. This war will be remembered in the history books as the Spanish-American War, and while it was a very brief conflict, it would have major historical consequences. By the 1890s, the people of the island of Cuba had unsuccessfully battled Spain for independence for many years. In 1895, the Cuban revolutionary José Martí led an expedition to the island, attempting to seize power from Spain. Due to economic interest in Cuba, the government of the United States sought to stabilize the situation on the small island. An agreement was negotiated between the United States and Spain by which Cuba would become independent and self-governing on January 1st, 1898. Seems simple enough, right? U.S. economic interests in Cuba were safe, and the people of Cuba would finally be free of Spain. Unfortunately for all parties involved, after this agreement was made between the U.S. and Spain, the shit hit the fan, excuse my language. In January 1898, a riot by Cuban Spanish loyalists against the new autonomous government broke out in Havana. They destroyed the printing presses of 4 local newspapers that had published articles critical of Spanish army atrocities. Following the riot, President William McKinley sent the battleship USS Maine to Havana to protect U.S. political and economic interests on the nearby island. Now here's where the shit hits the fan. On the night of February 15, 1898, a massive explosion of unknown origin sank the battleship USS Maine in Cuba's Havana harbor. More than 260 of the 350-plus American crew members aboard the ship were killed in the explosion. Historians are still unsure what caused the USS Maine to explode, but popular sentiment at the time, encouraged by sensational journalism referred to as yellow journalism, blamed the disaster on the Spanish. An official U.S. Naval Court of Inquiry ruled in March 1898 that the ship was blown up by a mine, without directly placing the blame on Spain. Much of Congress and a majority of the American public expressed little doubt that Spain was responsible and called for a declaration of war. Now here's a quick hidden side note. In 1976, a team of American naval investigators concluded that the USS Maine explosion was likely caused by a fire that ignited its ammunition stocks, not by a Spanish mine or act of sabotage. Now let's return to 1898. Between April 19th through the 20th, 1898, the U.S. Congress adopted a joint resolution for war with Spain and sent an ultimatum to the Spanish government. An amendment to the U.S. Declaration of War, known as the Teller Amendment, was added, which proclaimed that the United States would not establish permanent control over Cuba. 2 days later, on April 21st, 1898, the United States ordered a blockade of Cuba. That same day, Spain suspended all diplomatic relations with the United States. By April 24th, Spain announced that a state of war existed between their country and the U.S., and the following day, April 25th, 1898, the United States responded by declaring war against Spain. The words, "Remember the Maine," became the signature rallying cry of pro-war Americans. The decision to go to war against Spain was fueled by public outrage over the USS Maine's destruction, as well as concern for the Cuban rebels and opposition to European colonization of the Americas. On April 22, 1898, the day after the United States ordered a blockade of Cuba, John H. Quick was transferred to Camp McCalla at Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. It was on this same day that the U.S. fleet left Key West, Florida for Havana to begin the Cuban blockade at the principal ports on the north coast of the island and at Cienfuegos, a city on the southern coast of Cuba. Although Cuba played a key role in the start of the Spanish-American War, battles between the United States and Spain took place around the world. In fact, the first major battle took place in the Philippines on May 1st, 1898, in the Battle of Manila Bay, during which the U.S. Asiatic Squadron destroyed the Spanish Pacific Fleet. War actually began for the U.S. and Cuba in June, when 600 U.S. Marines, including John H. Quick, landed at Guantanamo on June 10, 1898, with the assistance of Colonel Enrique Thomas of the Cuban forces. A campsite was selected on the top of a hill where the old Spanish blockhouse had been located and was renamed McCalla Hill in honor of Commander Bowman H. McCalla of the USS Marblehead. After repulsing a number of Spanish attacks during the first few days, it was decided to capture Cusco Well, located about 6 miles southeast of Camp McCalla and near the coast, the only water supply for the Spanish forces in the area. During the morning of June 14, 1898, Marines of Companies C and D and approximately 50 Cubans moved through the hills to seize Cusco Well. The USS Dolphin, a gunboat of the U.S. Navy, moved east along the shore ready to supply naval gunfire support if needed. The Spanish soon realized the American movement and their main troops near the well were alerted. The Marines and Cubans occupied the hill which overlooked the enemy's position, but were immediately subjected to heavy long-range rifle fire. The USS Dolphin was signaled to fire upon the Spanish position, but due to the fact that the messenger was not clearly visible, the message was misinterpreted, and the vessel began dropping shells on a small detachment of Marines who were en route to join the fight. The problem of directing the fire of the USS Dolphin was solved by 27-year-old Sergeant John H. Quick, who heroically placed himself in plain sight of the U.S. vessel, in danger of falling shells, and signaled for the gunfire to be stopped, using a blue polka dot neckerchief as large as a quilt belonging to the Cubans. Due to the fact that the background was very poor for visibility, Sergeant Quick scrambled to the top of the hill where he was plainly visible against the sky blue horizon. As he calmly turned his back to the enemy and began waving his flag, he was immediately subjected to furious enemy rifle fire. While enemy bullets cut through the bushes and screamed overhead, Sergeant Quick continued to signal the Dolphin as coolly as though he were on a parade ground. On 3 different occasions, while exposed to heavy enemy fire, Quick signaled the USS Dolphin and the ship finally answered. Sergeant Quick then picked up his rifle and resumed his place on the firing line. The USS Dolphin shifted her fire towards the Spanish, and by 2 p.m., the Spaniards had begun to retreat. Sergeant John H. Quick was a hero who would later be rewarded for his actions on that warm June day in Cuba. The Battle of Cusco Well secured the only freshwater source at Guantanamo Bay for the American troops, driving Spanish forces from the area and ensuring Guantanamo Bay could be used as a naval station for the U.S. during further Spanish-American War actions in the Caribbean. This battle is considered by many historians to be the first modern Marine Corps battle. Before we continue, it would be remiss of me not to briefly mention the most famous of all the units fighting in Cuba, a cavalry regiment full of cowboys, athletes, and other tough, courageous men, known as the Rough Riders. This was the name given to the first U.S. volunteer cavalry under the leadership of Theodore Roosevelt. Roosevelt resigned his position as Assistant Secretary of the Navy in May 1898 to join the volunteer cavalry. Legends in the Spanish-American War, the Rough Riders battled not only guerrilla forces on a hot, humid battlefield, but also disease and a lack of equipment. They also made headlines for their role in the Battle of San Juan Hill, which became the stuff of legend thanks to Roosevelt's writing ability and reenactments filmed long after. In May 1898, U.S. troops landed in Puerto Rico, where they faced little Spanish opposition. By August 2, 1898, Spain and the United States began to negotiate an end to the conflict, with the Spanish accepting the peace terms laid out by President William McKinley. Hostilities formally ended on August 12, 1898, and the Treaty of Paris, which officially ended the Spanish-American War, was signed on December 10, 1898. The first significant military conflict after the Civil War, the Spanish-American War played a key role in reuniting the nation and strengthening American nationalism. It also expanded U.S. territory beyond the American continent. Spain gave up Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines to the United States, while Cuba, though nominally independent, became a U.S. protectorate. Immediately after the war, the United States occupied Cuba, but as provided for in the Teller Amendment, did not try to annex it. Famously described by Secretary of State John Hay as a splendid little war, the Spanish-American War confirmed that by the turn of the 20th century, the United States had become a global power that had put an end to Spain's colonial empire in the Western Hemisphere. The U.S. had a new stake in international politics that would soon lead the young nation to play a determining role in the affairs of Europe and the rest of the globe in the following years to come. According to a document found in the military files of John H. Quick through the National Archives, which is available on our website, on November 28, 1898, it was recommended to the Secretary of the Navy that John H. Quick receive the Medal of Honor for his actions on June 14, 1898 in Cuba. Approvals were received on December 2nd and December 6, 1898. John H. Quick returned to the United States on January 17, 1899, and the following day, he was appointed First Sergeant. In a newspaper article dated February 21, 1899, available on our website, it was announced that John H. Quick would receive the Medal of Honor for his heroic actions in Cuba during the Spanish-American War. On April 26, 1899, John H. Quick was promoted to Gunnery Sergeant, and on October 22, 1901, Quick joined Company F, 2nd Regiment in the Philippine Islands. After its defeat in the Spanish-American War of 1898, Spain ceded its long-standing colony of the Philippines to the United States in the Treaty of Paris. On February 4, 1899, just 2 days before the U.S. Senate ratified the treaty, fighting broke out between American forces and Filipino nationalists who sought independence rather than a change in colonial rulers. This conflict would be known as the Philippine Insurrection or Philippine-American War. During the Philippine Insurrection, John H. Quick participated in a military campaign known as the March Across Samar. On September 28, 1901, Filipino nationalists massacred personnel of Company C, 9th U.S. Infantry Regiment in the town of Balangiga on Samar Island. Many of the Americans were hacked to death. In the aftermath of this terrible event, a battalion of U.S. Marines, 14 officers, and approximately 300 enlisted men under Major Littleton W. T. Waller were sent to Samar to crush the Filipino rebels. Major Waller was told, "I want no prisoners. I wish you to kill and burn. The more you kill and burn, the better it will please me. The interior of Samar must be made a howling wilderness." The campaign against Samar Island took place from October 26, 1901 until March 1902, and by July 4, 1902, President Theodore Roosevelt proclaimed an end to the insurrection in the Philippines. Despite Roosevelt's proclamation, isolated and sporadic guerrilla activity continued throughout the period of American rule, which lasted until 1946, when the Philippines finally gained their independence. Ultimately, over 126,000 regular and volunteer soldiers served in the Philippines between 1899 and 1902. Of these, 1,000 died in battle or of wounds received in battle, 3,000 more died of disease and other causes, and nearly another 3,000 were wounded. For his participation in the Philippine Insurrection, John H. Quick received the Philippine Campaign Medal. After his expedition in the Philippines, John H. Quick settled down to a more peaceful routine. He was honorably discharged from the Marines on October 13, 1902, and re-enlisted the following day. On November 24, 1903, Quick received another promotion to Quartermaster Sergeant, and on December 27, 1905, he was appointed to the rank of Sergeant Major, continuing in that rank throughout the remainder of his service. Between December 1905 and December 1913, John H. Quick continued to serve in the Marine Corps and was sent to various stations in the United States from California to New York. He spent a couple of months in Panama in 1906 and briefly returned to the Philippines from 1909 to 1911. On February 6, 1914, John H. Quick boarded a ship for Mexico, the next chapter in his saga. In April 1914, 43-year-old Sergeant Major John H. Quick arrived in Veracruz, Mexico. His reason for being in Mexico began on April 9, 1914, when Mexican officials arrested 9 U.S. sailors who had strayed into restricted space in the small oil town of Tampico. This set off a diplomatic crisis between Mexico and the United States that became known as the Tampico Affair. It seemed minor enough at first. Mexican authorities apologized for the incident, but refused to salute the American flag, a salute the Americans would then have returned. The Tampico incident, along with 2 other recent incidents of Mexican disrespect, led President Woodrow Wilson to take the matter to Congress, where he received approval to use the U.S. military to obtain from Mexico the fullest recognition of the rights and dignity of the United States. The occupation of Veracruz commenced on April 21, 1914, when U.S. Navy warships in the Gulf of Mexico lined Veracruz Harbor and prepared to attack. The invasion force, which consisted of several Marine detachments and some armed sailors, amounted in total to several hundred men. Among them was Sergeant Major John H. Quick. Veracruz, Mexico was occupied by the United States by the afternoon of April 21, 1914, after the city was shelled by U.S. ships against those who had decided to resist the invasion. As tensions between the United States and Mexico reached a fever pitch over Veracruz, the risk of a broader regional conflict loomed. Into this situation stepped an unlikely trio of peacemakers, Argentina, Brazil, and Chile, the rising powers of South America. They convened the Niagara Falls Peace Conference in May 1914, and after tense negotiations, ultimately a plan was produced for U.S. withdrawal contingent on concessions from Mexico's government, led by the Mexican President, General Victoriano Huerta. A plan was formed in June 1914 for the United States to withdraw from Veracruz once General Huerta resigned the presidency of Mexico. Once he resigned in July 1914, however, the new leader of Mexico rejected the peace plan of Niagara Falls, but later agreed to accept the rest of the terms of the peace plan. On July 31, 1914, Quick was awarded a letter of commendation by the Secretary of the Navy for conspicuous courage, coolness, and skill in transmitting orders and messages under fire at Veracruz, Mexico. He also received the Mexican Campaign Medal for his services. In that same month, July 1914, World War I began. On November 23, 1914, the final American forces withdrew from Veracruz, and John H. Quick was honorably discharged as a sergeant major on December 16, 1914, in New York City. As expected, John re-enlisted the following day. The conflict in Veracruz was the end of the lull before the storm. There was trouble in Haiti, in Santo Domingo, and the big scrap in Europe was looming more pretentious every day. The occupation of Veracruz certainly had diplomatic consequences, incensing anti-American feeling throughout Latin America, and also helping Mexico tilt toward the pro-German camp during the First World War. On December 31, 1914, 2 weeks after re-enlisting in the Marine Corps, 44-year-old John Henry Quick got married to a woman named Edith Lucille Yost in St. Louis, Missouri. As 1914 turned into 1915 and the First World War devastated Europe, the United States remained neutral in the conflict. German submarine warfare in the Atlantic Ocean, however, kept tensions high. On May 7, 1915, Germany sank the British ocean liner Lusitania, killing more than 120 U.S. citizens and provoking outrage in the United States. Finally, on April 2, 1917, President Woodrow Wilson went before a joint session of Congress to request a declaration of war against Germany. Wilson cited Germany's violation of its pledge to suspend unrestricted submarine warfare in the North Atlantic and the Mediterranean, as well as its attempts to entice Mexico into an alliance against the United States, as his reasons for declaring war. On April 4, 1917, the U.S. Senate voted in support of the measure to declare war on Germany. The House concurred 2 days later on April 6, 1917, and war against the Imperial German government was official. The United States later declared war on German ally Austria-Hungary on December 7, 1917. Seven months after the United States declared war on Germany and joined World War I, 47-year-old Sergeant Major John H. Quick arrived in France on November 4, 1917. Serving with the battalion of the 6th Regiment, U.S. Marines, Quick first saw action during the Battle of Belleau Wood, which occurred in June 1918. His gallantry in the Battle of Belleau Wood earned him the Distinguished Service Cross and the Navy Cross. He earned these decorations when he volunteered and assisted in taking a truckload of ammunition and material into the French town of Beaurushes, over a road swept by artillery and machine gun fire, thereby relieving a critical situation. Sergeant Major Quick went on to participate in every battle that was fought by the Marines in France until October 16, 1918. He was further awarded the World War I Victory Medal and the French Fervigere. On October 24, 1918, John H. Quick arrived in New Jersey, and the following day, he applied for retirement. After 30 years, 1 month, and 24 days of service, 48-year-old John was ready to take a much-needed break. On November 20th, 1918, John H. Quick was placed on the retired list of enlisted men of the U.S. Marine Corps. But after 30 years in the Marine Corps, John just couldn't stay away, and on July 23, 1920, he resumed active duty in the recruiting district of St. Louis, Missouri, upon his own request. Almost 2 months later, on September 15, 1920, 50-year-old John H. Quick retired for a second and final time from the U.S. Marine Corps. In the last 2 years of his life, John H. Quick dealt with some health issues, including an attack of influenza that left his health impaired. Sergeant Major John Henry Quick died in St. Louis, Missouri on September 9, 1922, of a carcinoma of the neck. He was 52 years old. According to one newspaper article of the time, the Shepherdstown Register of West Virginia, John H. Quick was survived by his wife Edith, his father, and 5 sisters. His funeral was held on September 17, 1922, with a funeral procession that included detachments from the 138th Infantry, National Guard of Missouri, the 128th Field Artillery, Veterans of Foreign Wars, and the Marine Corps Club. John was buried at Memorial Park Cemetery with full military honors in Jennings, Missouri. 2 airplanes circled over the cemetery to drop flowers when the casket of John H. Quick reached the gravesite. A firing squad of 8 men from the Marine Corps recruiting detachment were also present to send off a true hero of the U.S. Marine Corps. In a death report by the Bureau of Medicine and Surgery, Navy Department, dated 1923, it was determined by the Bureau of Medicine and Surgery that John H. Quick's death was the result of his active service in the U.S. Marine Corps, and therefore he died in the line of duty. This report is available to view on our website, HiddenHistoryPod.com. 20 years after his death, the USS Quick, named in honor of John H. Quick, was completed and launched on May 3, 1942. She proudly served the United States, earning 4 battle stars during World War II and was decommissioned in May 1949. Thank you for listening, and I hope that you've learned something new today. Season 3 of Hidden History has explored the lives of veterans of the United States, as well as veterans of foreign countries historically connected to our nation. Many of their stories have been hidden in the pages of history and deserve to be told. Pictures, newspaper clippings, and links to external articles relating to a particular episode are available on our website, hiddenhistorypod.com. Thanks again for listening. I'm John Rodriguez, and until we meet again, this has been Hidden History and Odyssey Through Time.